A couple weeks ago, I preached on a text from Isaiah 35. It was one of the lectionary texts for the season of Advent. And it was one of those texts that looks at, from Isaiah's perspective, what they hoped for in terms of the coming of a new leader, a new Messiah. It was written to the exiles who had been defeated and taken out of their homeland, and it was a hopeful message that talked about that return that was coming to them. But in the midst of this, as it talks about the coming of the Lord, there was a verse that I didn't get a chance to preach as closely on a couple weeks ago, and that's probably a good thing. In fact, when I was in seminary, they told us when you're preaching a text, don't try to preach all of it, because if you preach all of it, you're never going to get out of that particular worship service, which some people think I already do. Anyway, I digress. I was preaching on Isaiah 35, and the part that I was focused on, or wasn't able to focus on, was this part. It's talking about seeing the coming of the glory of the Lord. And it says this, 35, beginning at the last part of verse 2. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are fearful of heart, be strong, do not fear. Here is your God. He will come with vengeance and terrible recompense. He will come and save you. Now, the specific verse that I probably wanted to touch on but wasn't able to work into the sermon was from verse 4. Here is your God. He will come with vengeance and terrible recompense. Now, when we think of the coming of Jesus, we now think or see that coming of Jesus very differently, perhaps, than many of those who imagined the coming of the Messiah, what they imagined would happen on that day. And Isaiah's words are part of those words that kind of went into this idea that when the coming of the Messiah came, it was going to be like huge. It was going to be big. It was going to come with vengeance and power and recompense, and it was going to make sure that those who had done Israel wrong were put in their place. There was this idea that when the Messiah came, it was going to be this powerful moment. It was going to be this moment that would take everybody by storm. Everyone would see it, and the power of God and the vengeance of God was going to be poured out like you've never believed, which is probably why when Jesus came, so many missed him. In fact, after I had preached this sermon and was thinking about it a little bit, I thought about the shepherds in the field and the message that had come to them. Many of you may have heard this passage, but let me just read part of it again. I want you to hear what it has to say. This is after the birth of Jesus, by the way. In that region, there were shepherds living in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. Then an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone about them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, do not be afraid, for see, I am bringing you good news of great joy, which will be for all people. To you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is the Messiah, the Lord. And this will be a sign unto you. You will find the child wrapped in bands of cloth and lying in the manger. And suddenly there was with the angels a multitude of heavenly hosts, praising God and saying, glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace among those whom he favors. Man, that was a big moment, wasn't it, for those disciples? An angel comes, and then the skies are filled with this army of angels. It was a big moment. And then that one angel says, and this will be a sign to you. You're going to find this little baby wrapped in rags and lying in a feeding trough. What? I mean, I don't know how well versed these shepherds were in the prophecy of Isaiah and the other prophets. In fact, maybe they weren't as well versed as others, and so maybe it didn't take them by such great surprise. But you know what? If you were a learned person who had read Isaiah and who had focused on those verses about God coming with vengeance and recompense, God was going to set it right, God was going to take revenge on your enemies, if that was what you thought was going to happen at the coming of Jesus, and then an angel tells you you're going to find this little baby dressed in rags and laying in a feeding trough, you would have just thought, I think we missed something. And again, that's why I think a lot of people miss Jesus. I mean, when he came and he began to preach and teach, he didn't come with fists ready to wail on his enemies. He came with words of comfort and joy and peace. Yes, he challenged the Pharisees. And yes, there was that moment where he flipped over the tables, right, in anger. But for the most part, what Jesus was showing God's form of vengeance, God's form of recompense, God's form of revenge had nothing to do with a slash and burn mentality. God, through Jesus, was giving us an absolutely different sign of love and grace and peace. Jesus was trying to say to us that now that time of brokenness is over, now it is a time for all of us to come together. There is no need for the kind of punishment, the kind of vengeance that many of them imagined that Messiah was going to come for them. You know, those who were in those early days with Jesus missed the sign. They missed the sign because they were looking for something different. And perhaps there's many of us who are in that same danger of missing the sign and the symbol of what Jesus is trying to teach us and bring to us. Don't miss the sign. Don't miss the message this Christmas.